All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast, and we got an amazing episode for you today. We are in the shadows of an election. So Ben and I unpack the policies on both sides of politics to see what their impact is on property. How do we cover it, Ben?
Well, Bryce, we're going to look at it from a demand and supply point of view, and where does that lead us in terms of property prices? We're going deep, Bryce. We're going deep.
Will it actually fix the housing affordability crisis, folks? Let's dive in and find out. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And, of course, welcome back to you too, Ben. How are you, mate?
Mate, I feel a little refreshed. Obviously, there's been Easter that then rolled in to, that 10-day break that you told me about at the start of the year. Well, I had to work one of those days, but I got a couple of days off.
Yes.
Did a little bit of admin.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
What sort of admin? Just stuff around the house, or
a little bit of housekeeping around the house, but also a little bit of admin around the portfolio and getting the tax. Like it's there's a portfolio there that needs a little bit of minutiae. So I've decided to sell a property in my self-managed super fund and take the profits.
Are we allowed to use 4-letter words on this podcast, Ben? Sell.
Yeah. Remember, we say not never sell. We say normally you wouldn't sell. But I'm trying to get access to a little bit of cash. I've told you about a market that I'm interested in. So maybe I'll have to fly north and potentially buy in that market. I think it's prone. It's actually already moving pretty quick. But I think, another little purchase up in that market. Just maybe. I'm toying with the idea.
And mate, the good friend of the podcast, Cole Langford, I was kind of hoping that he would have got the Anzac Day medal, but he didn't.
No.
And sadly, actually not sadly, the bloke who got it is just a legend, isn't he? Just being able to stay upright and play at that quality for that long. But mate, have you got a little? For the majority of our listeners, they can't see you; they just listen to you, Ben. But you've got a little Cheshire cat grin on your face, given that you're on top of the ladder.
Well, yeah, but here's the irony. I mean, like Steele, this time last year, they were talking about his career's over, right? Too old, too slow. He didn't have a great start to the year, and now he's a weapon. Now he's playing the best footy of his life. But I just love the narrative that comes out. If we'd have lost 4 out of our 5, we're the oldest by age team, and so it'll be age and too slow and now it's like experience, and they just spin the narrative to fit. It's just
now it's just like the nursing home squad that Geelong won it with.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And up until that, they talked about them being too old and the game's moved on from them. So I just find that narrative really lazy. In terms of telling the story, right? But again, I get it. It's got to suit the masses who just digest things in really simple bite-sized pieces. So no, but look, I'm excited for the year. We've started well, but no good in being.
I think the frustrating thing for the rest of us, mate. I think the frustrating thing for the non-pies is I watched you on the weekend. I thought, ooh, that's looking. Well drilled is probably what I thought. It looks like your premiership hangover that a lot of teams get. You've put that aside, and now you've gone back to being hungry again, and that's annoying for the rest of us.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. But I mean, look, when you saw us get beaten by GWS in round 1 by zero round or opening round by over 50 points, we didn't look that great. So it's normally when you got the ball in the hand that you actually look pretty good instead of chasing tail. But yes, the pressure was up, and we've been playing well. So well done, boys.
Hey, mate, we go to air on this episode, if people are up to date, a couple of days before a federal election. That is the topic of the day that we are going to cover today. We're going to talk about the election promises versus the reality. So we want to know, will any party actually fix housing? So we're going to talk to that. But before we get there, Ben, we are now in the month. It is the month of my 50th birthday. I know it sounds like a self-indulgent thing, but what I'm trying to do is we're trying to raise some money. So we've done part one raise with all the people that are coming over, and we're now trying to do part two raise, where we're trying to help 100 people. So Stiggy gave me an update yesterday. We've raised an additional just under 3,000, Ben, 2,925, which is incredible. So to those people who have contributed, I am wonderfully grateful. So that's actually going to help about 29 people, Ben, get their eyesight back, which is amazing. But we do have a goal for part two raise to get 100 people their eyesight back. So we need another 71 people helped. So I just want to shout out to those folks. We're now getting to the pointy end. So if you listen to me reach out and ask you to get involved, and we're giving any value over the journey, and you can, I appreciate tough budgets at the moment, Ben, but if you can contribute some money to the cause, if you go to the propertycouch.com.au/donation and leave some basic details there, we would love for you to contribute. So we're just under a month away before we're over there, Ben. We're going to be recording a podcast over there. We're going to bring some insights back to our community via our socials and through our YouTube channel. So that'll be pretty cool.
And just for some people who may not have been catching up on recent pods, Bryce, you're talking about restoring eyesight. Yes. So, for people or potentially creating their ability to see for the first time, which is incredible.
Yeah, so you and I and a bunch of people, a bunch of really kind-hearted folks, we're flying over to Indonesia. We're going into a remote village where they've got no money, they've got no access to money, and we're going to help them with the money that we've raised to get eyesight back. So there'll be hundreds and hundreds of people that are impacted by that. So that lights me up, Ben. It fills my spirit more than I can describe. So if anyone wants to get involved with that, basically I'm donating my 50th birthday. I've told everyone around me I'm donating my 50th birthday. All of my energy is going towards this cause. And some really cool, kind-hearted folks are going to come and hang out with us as well. All right, Ben, my Mindset Minute theme today, obviously we're going to tackle election stuff today, and I've been thinking about this, and I've been thinking about the mantra and the culture of what the Property Couch has been for the last decade, and it's all around taking responsibility for yourself and not waiting around for anyone else to come and save us. So I figured if we're doing a theme today around election, I thought I might lean into this, and it's some ponderings that I've been having of late and sort of combine them together to give someone something to think about as they go into this election this weekend. But it's around waiting for permission versus taking ownership. So there are two ways that you can approach your life. One is to wait for others to solve your problems. That's the Disney movie approach, Ben, where someone's coming to save you. Which unfortunately, if that is your approach to life, it only happens in Disney movies. It doesn't happen in real life. And the other one is to become the person who solves problems for yourself, right? So here's the thing that I want to get across to everyone. Governments will promise, delay, compromise, and change because that's their nature. That's the nature of a cycle that is not going to change. If you've got federal and state election cycles being 4 and 3 years, by nature, they will not be able to change that structure to do anything meaningful because they've got to play for the short term, but we want them to actually think for the long term. So that's not going to happen. So if you pin your future, whether it's owning a home, building wealth, creating some form of freedom on what a government does, you effectively hand over control of your life, because lasting success comes from personal ownership of your mind, ownership of the actions that you take, and ownership of your outcomes. So smart people actually keep an eye on external factors, right? So they're clearly you're not ignorant to what's going on the weekend, but they design their life to win regardless of who's in power. So here's the message, Ben, that I want to take away for everyone listening to this in the shadows of another federal election. Don't wait for permission to build the life that you want. The government might set the rules, but you're still the player in the field. Control what you can control. That's the mindset that wins in property and in life. So, Ben, I thought that was something for us to chew on and think about, because a lot of people, and the people that you and I haven't done this for a long time, or the people that we spend time with, they're sort of bigger picture thinkers, that they're not relying on that. But I want to speak to those folks who think that when I grew up in a household where it was very much the narrative around, when the government does some change, then things will be better. So I really wanted to speak to my own lived experience around that, but also just encourage our folks that we are about to launch into policies on both sides. You and I are going to then have a take on those policies on both sides, and then you and I are going to arrive at a conclusion, and we're going to give our thoughts around a conclusion. But at the end of the day, this election will come and go. Another one will happen in a few years' time. It'll come and go. And some of the same patterns will repeat themselves. But what won't repeat itself is how we respond and how we react to that.
I think, mate, I really love that piece. If anyone wants to just go back and listen to what Bryce just talked about, effectively what we're saying is we're a blessed country, right? We have no competing borders. We've got stable democracy, only one of 21 nations around the world that has a stable democracy, where, whoever wins the election on Saturday, we will accept the result. We won't say that there was corruption or anything like that. So I think we're just blessed, and effectively it's a competition of ideas. But to Bryce's point, we've become this nation through a lot of luck because of our mineral resources. But the other part of the back of that luck is we've also done it through hard work, right? And through knowledge and educating ourselves and taking action as a nation, right? And that's aspiration. And I think, what we don't want to lose as a nation is that aspirational aspect, rather than the tall poppy syndrome, which we have a bit of that, and that's a bit of the Aussie culture. But the reality is, if you educate yourself and you work hard, is it fair that you then have to support others is the question. Now, the most needy in our community, absolutely. I mean, I think, with what Bryce was saying about, Bryce is at level 7 of the 7 grades of financial wellbeing. He's in contribution phase now. And so his 50th birthday is a perfect example of him doing that contribution. So helping the most needy, not only in our community, but obviously, in our neighbouring community, in our neighbouring country. So that's the type of thing you do. But what we don't want to destroy is this idea that if we work hard and we get a good job, then we should be able to enjoy that and celebrate that through the things that we do, the assets that we buy, and all those types of things. The moment we start taking away that aspiration and start believing as a collective that it's the government's job to look after us, then we get lazy. And then we get uncompetitive. And if you want to understand how successful we have been, a lot of our wealth has come from exporting our goods and services, but also our knowledge. And if we start losing that competitive advantage, we are going to get trounced. And that will mean that our standard of living and those opportunities and the whole society can potentially collapse in on itself, which is, as I said to you, just go and have a look at Argentina's story in terms of governments promising everything and then not delivering, promising, not delivering, promising, not delivering, and trying to buy your vote. So I think it's a really important message here. Aspiration must remain at the highest priority level for all of us. And through that hard work and that education that we do, we should be rewarded for that. And then about how much of our money that we earn is then passed on to support the most vulnerable in our community is an important metric, right? And that's always debated in terms of how much that should be. But I think what you put there together, Bryce, is excellent.
Everything's a continuous cycle. Tony Robbins says, good times create weak people create bad times create strong people create good times. And it just becomes this continuous cycle, right? So, but I guess the main takeaway that you and I are trying to say here for our community of aspirational folks is don't wait for something external to happen to build the life that you want. The government, sets the rules, but you're still the player in the field. Right. Hey, today, Ben, we wanted to talk to the election promises versus the reality of them, and we actually want to work out, is it short-term thinking? Is there any long-term thinking in it? Is it just the cyclical nature of election cycles where the name of power is buying votes? Is there anything that's systemic that is able to help our markets and our property markets on the long term? We're going to talk to that in today's episode. But we want to set up a couple of things. First of all, we love the idea that every Aussie will be a homeowner. That's if you walk into our office, up on the wall, you've got a signature statement, Ben. You might want to talk to that around how we can help as many people as possible.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's what the statement. I believe that every Australian has the opportunity to create financial independence and freedom. And it's the decisions that we make right through our life, such as the basic ones, which is get an education and then work hard, make smart decisions with your money, make smart decisions with the relationships and the people that you hang around, set a strong mindset. And ultimately, if all of those things work out well for you and you're sensible with your money, you will create a level of financial capacity and financial comfort over the decades. And so with that also should come, the ability to buy and own a home as part of that. So that is in our DNA. It's in our baseline.
We believe that if the mantra of this podcast is to help you have a passive income so that you can create lifestyle by design, the baseline for that is for us is in retirement, having a roof over your head that's yours, that's paid for, gives you the greatest chance of increasing your lifestyle at a time in your life where your physical energy isn't at its peak, for a lot of people, and your opportunities for income are not at their peak. So having a roof over your head is a core foundation. So that's the baseline for this conversation today. That's what we want. And so we want to look at the big solutions, the big promises for the housing crisis in inverted commas, Ben. But we want to work out if the plans will help you get into the market, or will they just push prices higher? And we'll come to that conclusion at the end of today's conversation. But I hinted at it before. We're going to talk about some headline policies for each of the two major parties, Ben. And then we're going to do a little deep dive into them as well, so we can help people with respect to the upcoming election around their policy. So first of all, Ben, do you want to kick it off? Give us headline level before we deep dive on the Labor policies.
Yeah, so there's the shared equity scheme, which was originally, so this is Labor, but it was originally introduced by the Liberals, and it's off the back of policies that were operating in WA was the first place where they did this, and then Victoria picked up that policy, and that policy is a good policy. So both parties have this shared equity expansion, so we'll go a little deeper into that. In terms of the Labor government are committing $10 billion for social and affordable housing, and of course they also want to be able to build 100,000 new homes as part of that, so we'll go a little bit deeper on that. 5% deposit scheme with no LMI, that's their big new policy for this election. So we want to go into what that looks like, and potentially, to Bryce's point, what does that do to demand drivers and potentially supply side in terms of, and then finally, what they have done is they've really increased the rental assistance for those low income earners. 1.1 million have got this increase in rental assistance. There's been 2 tranches of that. So that's sort of been the core of Labor's policy. In terms of the Coalition's policy, well, their big announcement a couple of weeks ago was mortgage interest tax deductibility on your first home. And so there are some conditions on that. So we'll take a little bit of a dive into that. Then there's also accessing $50,000 out of your super for home deposit. We know that the deposit is one of the biggest barriers of getting into the market if you don't have the support of the bank of mum and dad. There's also some smart work that's being done around incentivising shovel-ready projects. So we'll talk more about incentivising and fast-tracking approvals to bring supply forward. And then there's a 25% cut in immigration, which they believe will obviously reduce the level of demand for housing, which will then obviously limit pressure in terms of not only rental, but potentially price growth as well as part of that. So they're the sort of macro policies. But what I thought would be important, and one of the things that Bryce and I pride ourselves on, is we want to go deeper into that, right? In terms of when you understand the property market is a complex market, right? It's a classic dynamic market, and it has complexity attached to it. In terms of how supply is generated, and then also how demand is also born in this complex market. So there are some other policies that we also want to introduce you to improve your thinking and improve your understanding as you make this important decision around who you may vote for in your local area. So
we're going to dive into those, folks. But one of the things, just to help you with the framework that Ben and I are looking at, the two parties' policies, is we know from numerous conversations that he and I have had over the journey, numerous conversations with experts that we've had on the couch, we know that the real solution to affordability comes from the supply side, not the demand side. So for us, we're going to have a very strong filter around what do the policies that are proposed do to demand, and what do the proposed policies do to potentially improve supply, if at all. So with that as a context, Ben, let's rip in. Let's start with the Australian Labor Party housing policies. Kick it off, and then we'll get into some commentary.
Yeah, so there's a $10 billion sovereign fund, which is effectively the Australian Housing Future Fund, right? Now, that fund is all about sort of building up investments. So what they do is they go and invest that money, and then ultimately the returns off that money will then potentially help with new and social and affordable housing, similar to the way in which, in terms of the government services, they set up a future fund, the Australian Future Fund, that looks after the superannuation of public servants and so forth. And that's just the way in which a government thinking, well, if I can get return on that money, then ultimately we'll just use that money, but the base load of that money will be there. There's a little bit of a problem with that. The markets have sort of had a bit of a crash, and so there's potentially a need to add extra funds to that. Now, the markets have returned a little bit off the back of Trump's cooling on
Play
tariffs.
to the trend, Ben. Play to the trend.
Yeah, but the reality is still that this endowment is important in terms of being able to build up over $500 million per year into housing projects. Now, I've been very vocal about how governments are pretty ordinary at running rental accommodation. Right, it's very expensive for them to run. They've got more regulations that they put on themselves. When people are moving out and new people are moving into social housing, there's lots of extra things that they do. So it's very expensive for them to run. So the idea of this fund is to be able to sort of draw on that money, because they know it just gets more and more expensive to deliver social and public housing. And that's why over the last 3 decades, we've seen a real deterioration in governments wanting to be and play in this space, and they want the private sector, including sort of mum and dad investors, to basically play that role. So that's the main one in terms of that future fund.
That's a tick, isn't it, Ben? Because if you think about the idea of having a retirement where you have a capital base that provides you with a passive income on top, so that you just keep that passive. So you're not laying the goose. Not selling the goose that lays the golden egg. The intention here is solid in that, rather than just having it as an expense item, they're actually looking to create a base that spits off income, notwithstanding your point around the market's performance, that then they can invest it into a cause as good as this. So I think
Norway,
that's a tick.
Norway has this massive sovereign wealth fund.
It's incredible.
It's incredible, right? And so that's why all their schooling and all of their education is free. And
it seems that they've got it right, Ben, because they allow the natural resources that are bestowed of that geography to actually go to the people, rather than a few select billionaires. But I think Kevin Rudd's had a swing at that before, and it didn't work so well.
No, that's right. And look, what we also like about this particular thing in terms of the most vulnerable in our community are usually women, and women over 50 years of age. And so they're also committing to build 30,000 new and affordable houses over the next 5 years. And that includes 4,000 of those for women and children who are fleeing domestic violence. Great. So I think from that point of view, it's a nice touch in terms of, and this is what you get with Labor. They will always focus on those most vulnerable and needy in our community, and that's an example of it.
Okay, next one, Ben.
Yeah, so the next one is the National Housing Accord and the new home bonus. So what they're doing here is they're targeting 1.2 million new homes nationwide. Now, that was originally up from the million. Now, there's a problem with this. That was a aspirational target. On our calculations, they're going to fall short by around 300,000. and this is the bureaucracy at work here. It just takes, time for all these sort of initiatives to flow through. But that includes $15,000 per home incentive for states, to basically help build those new dwellings, right? Remember, what we've got to remember here is that housing is effectively a state issue, but here we are looking at the federal governments to solve the problems that the states in some respects have also created. Only recently on a couple of podcasts back, we talked about how almost $400,000 to $500,000 to build a home is in taxes and charges. And so, if you want to make property more affordable, you've got to eliminate a lot of those taxes and charges as part of that particular story. So that's ultimately the 1.2. So that's a $3 billion commitment as part of that. And then there's a $500 million housing support program for that local infrastructure. Now, we're going to touch on this a little bit more on the Liberal side, because this is about unlocking new housing in terms of connecting services and developing what we call shovel-ready sites. Now, again, if you're an avid listener of the pod, go back and listen to Tim Reardon on our HIA chief economist. He's saying this is the most important thing that can happen in terms of getting supply moving in the right direction. So
this one seems encouraging too, Ben, because you've got an aspirational target, which we've talked to the fact that it's easy to say a number, it's harder to actually execute on the number, but humans are the study of incentives, or economics is the study of human incentives, right? So therefore, having an incentive to get them to that million base target, that's a step in the right direction, I think, because if some of the state, local and state governments want access to more money, there's an opportunity for them. So getting the incentives aligned on that one, that's actually smart.
It is. So let's move on now to the Social Housing Accelerator. And so this is rapid funding injection into the states. So to try and build those 4,000 new social housing units, that is for those most vulnerable in our community. And there's a $2 billion one-time federal payment to governments for social housing. So that's a direct capital grant for, again, projects that the states and territories will be bidding for that money in terms of building social and public housing to basically address that most need in the homelessness issues that we're potentially seeing across the nation. So again, another evidence of really targeted measures for those most vulnerable in our community.
Now, to get that off the ground, Ben, I've seen this live before, is to really give access to the developers to go and find sites and actually get those sites tied up risk-free, getting the government to sign it off. We had I've talked about this on the pod before. Some people may not have heard that, but we did that back when Kevin Rudd was trying to punch us out of GFC. And the developers responded enormously, Ben. They were sniffing money. And so they were around putting offers on sites and then putting it through the government process. And if they got a tick, they'd then go unconditional on the site. So if you get the incentives aligned there's already precedent that works. The other one is the Help to Buy scheme, Ben. I've got a family member who's enjoyed the benefits of this, but this is part of the Labor campaign.
Yeah, so 10,000 per annum is their target. This allows the government to take an equity interest in your property around 30 to 40%. So what does this do for the consumer? It allows the consumer to potentially buy into an area that might have necessarily been considered unaffordable, but because the government is backing that with a $5.5 million pledge in terms of the forward estimates in the budget papers, this is basically allowing people to buy that. Now, over time, potentially you can buy them out of that, or if you do sell the home, they will take their percentage proceeds of that. So I've been a big fan of this type of policy for many, many years, because I think what it does do is it lets the free market operate, but it allows these participants to potentially get into the market and also participate as first home buyers. So I think it's an excellent scheme, and I'd like to see it continued. And in fact, similar to the future fund, the housing fund that we were talking before about, I've advocated that the profits that are made from the future sales or the buyout of the government on these particular properties makes a lot of sense to me in terms of that money being re-injected into the program over time. And I'd like to see it as an evergreen program that the government keeps in play.
We have to think about this in terms of demand too, Ben. So if you've got 7 black dominoes and 1 red domino, and the red domino signifies the person who wants to play the game, but they're not. If you lift those 7 dominoes up and stack the red one underneath, by nature, what you've done is you've actually just created more demand and you've created more interest in the market. And extending that analogy a little further, the top 7 dominoes would actually have the value of what they've got going up by a little bit too, because it pushes everything up. So I think the policy is great for people who are sitting on the sidelines to get in. And I can say again, I've got family who have enjoyed this in the last 12 months, and they wouldn't have got in otherwise. So they're in a property, and they're super excited about that. But what we do have to talk about is the fact that if you've got a bath that's overflowing, the water representing the amount of people who want a house and the bath representing the supply, what we've just done there is actually turn the tap a little faster. So it's a win to get people in, but it means that they'll be paying a little bit more because we're just creating demand. It's just pulling demand out of thin air, where people weren't able to get in before, now can. And by nature, it's just adding more fuel into the fire.
Yeah, and I think that's why the policy mechanism here that you've got to consider is the volume. So it's 10,000. So in Australia, we will build and buy and transact between anything from sort of 550 to 650,000 transactions a year, right? So this is 10,000 potential new buyers, to your point, coming into that market. Now, if they're spread out, you got to then think about, is it a concentrated push? And the next one will be a concentrated push. So we're going to get on to, turning the tap on into the bath a little bit more. But I think, with things like these types of policies, you've got to potentially look at those mechanisms in terms of that. Because if this was a carte blanche, everyone could get access to it, then it would make, significant pressure in terms of upward prices. But it is a nice lead in to their signature policy announced for this election, which is the Home Guarantee Scheme expansion. So this was originally set for around 40,000 households, right? So it's gone from 20,000 then to 40,000. Now they've basically said unlimited. So effectively what this is allowing is a 5% deposit. So we mentioned earlier that one of the biggest challenge, if not the biggest challenge, is saving for a deposit to get into the market. So what this policy has definitely done, because it is not restricted. It's restricted in terms of some of the prices you can pay. Yeah. So they have ratcheted up the scope in terms of making it accessible in marketplaces like Sydney and more expensive marketplaces. But the point we're making here is now it's allowing pretty much. Now we believe that there's between usually 100 to call it 150,000 new first home buyers that are interested or active in the market. So to Bryce's point, what this does is it pulls forward potential, people who might have saved over 4 or 5 years. If they're impatient in their savings program and they want to get into the market, that just brings forward that demand. And there's no avoiding the fact that a policy like this at such a broad scale, because remember, if they limited it to 40,000, it can be spread out we don't know just how much power this policy is going to have if Labor is successful and elected, because we expect that with falling interest rates, which will improve affordability and borrowing power, combined with only a 5% deposit to get in, that is a market mechanism. That's a significant mechanism change. And we do expect that this will have a reasonably material impact on demand. So this is the one. This is the one we
the lender's mortgage insurance that they would have ordinarily paid, that actually gets put into, like, that amount can actually go on top of their offer as well, so they can actually just
Yes.
incrementally creep a little bit more. So it definitely is adding demand to the equation. So again, as an election campaign, this is a success, Ben. This is a headline winner, right? Because it's saying more people can get in. So at the time of signing your vote on the weekend, you'd be thinking, great, they've helped me. But in terms of someone who understands the market and has been doing this for a long time, we can say this has definitely got an inflationary impact on prices, because you're all competing for similar batched prices within similar batch locations. That just means that you're going to end up having to pay more to get in. So you're on the ladder, but it's an inflationary impact on price.
Correct. Now, we remember when it was 20,000 and then up to 30 and then 40. So since 2022, there's been 67,000 Australians who have taken advantage of this through their mortgage broker, who have gone, because obviously lenders participate and the whole thing's controlled through that particular program. So this could accelerate that into 50,000, 70,000. When we're getting to those types of numbers, you're starting to materially bring demand forward. And that's why we think this one has price pressures attached to it.
Hey Ben, the next one's regarding rent assistance, which is good. You know, it's able to help people who need help to pay rent, which is better than obviously penalising the landlord. But talk us through this one.
Yeah, so there's been two tranches of this, and it's been certainly the most significant increase for in terms of Commonwealth rental assistance. We're talking about 1.3 million middle to low income earners who are eligible for this. It'll increase that. It's a $2.7 billion spend over the 4 years as per the budgets of 23-24. So we think, look, at the end of the day, it just means homelessness is a very, very dangerous place. Coming back from bottoming out and being able to get back up and re-establishing yourself, mental health aspects, general health aspects of being homelessness, those type of things, that has a significant consequence in our community. So this type of preventive measure, now I wish there had been other preventive measures in the first instance in terms of helping these people get educated and get on the path to financial money management so they don't find themselves in difficult situations. Now, in some cases, it's unavoidable, but in a lot of cases, you can see forks in the road or two-way doors that they've taken that hopefully we can prevent. So I'd like to see more prevention upstream rather than, what we have to deal with in terms of downstream, but it is a really good measure. In terms of the next one, the National Housing and Homelessness Agreement. So this builds on that particular story. We're talking around a 5-year agreement worth around $9.3 billion that will replace the old NHHA program. It doubles federal funding for homelessness program to around $400 million per year. And it's got to be matched by the states. And so we are definitely seeing, some significant money being invested in that. And again, they are definitely the most vulnerable in our community, but we also want to see those people get into jobs. And we want to see, the 1.3 million hopefully go down to 750,000 and, them being able to obviously then self-fund themselves and rebuild their lives if, they've had a significant medical event or mental health issue, or they've just unfortunately had very limited opportunities around that particular program.
Yeah, the next one, Ben, is the build-to-rent housing incentives. Now, this one is actually a supply side, which is great. So it's encouraging institutional investment in new rental housing developments. We've talked about this before, but there's an increased depreciation rate and reduced withholding tax for foreign investors. And so in the past, when we've encouraged foreign investment into medium and high density, that has been a positive for housing supply. And in this case, I think it's the same. If you are putting more money into eligible build-to-rent projects, which will create more construction, which then has a multiplier effect in the economy. So not only will it help with economic growth, but it'll increase the supply. And if you've got an increase in supply for certain types of properties, that gives more opportunities for more people to be able to have a roof over their head. So this one does play into supply, and I think it's a good one, Ben.
Yeah, it is. I mean, build to rent must be part of the mix. it's such a very, very small single-digit percentage of our housing supply. It needs to move up, but it is going to take a couple of decades for this product to work. So what you see here is governments throwing incentives at it. I wish, we're also on public record here, I wish they would show certain types of incentives to the small private rental accommodation provider as well. Yes. As obviously this is tax incentives and money back to the big end of town, institutional investors, superannuation funds, foreign investment, that they're doing nothing for the core of who supply 95% of the rental accommodation in Australia, and that's the small mum and dad investor in terms of that. But that's a little whinge, but broadly speaking, it's a good program. Finally, the last one, which we have been very critical on, and certainly if I'm wearing my picker hat, which is the National Rental Rights Standards. So the federal government, along with all state and territory governments, have agreed to a set of principles and desires to increase the rights of renters in properties. And some of those are well-meaning. Well, let's say all of them are well-meaning, but there are unintended consequences across some of those particular policies. And the net result of that is the appetite for further investment. So this is actually a supply diminisher policy, and it also means it's also compliance costs, holding costs, all these minimum standard costs has meant operating your small private rental accommodation business has expanded and costs more, and those costs are just going to be passed on in terms of higher rents. So we haven't got that balance right, but we are seeing more power in the hands of renters, and that is definitely reducing the supply of rental accommodation. So the governments are hoping that the supply of social and public housing and build to rent will supplement that, but that's years away, as we already know. I mean, they're already 300,000 to 400,000 behind on their pledge of 1.2 million new homes. So that just gives you a bit of an idea. Now, that rounds out Labor, and I think, how would I describe Labor's classic policy positions? Absolutely believing in the no one left behind. Some interesting targeted measures there. Their idea of building 100,000 homes through partnerships. I don't like governments, going into business. They normally don't do it very well. And it's only 20,000 houses. So in the grand scheme of things, it's not a macro policy that's going to make a big difference. So, I look at their policy positions and I say to myself, okay, definitely taking care of the most needy in the community, tick. But in terms of their broader policies outside of the 5% deposit, they're a bit scattergun, and they're not necessarily going to have a broader impact on the higher supply that we need and the incentive that we need to bring that supply in. So it's definitely, I probably it's throwing a lot of money at the problem, but it's probably a B in terms of if I give it a ranking.
Yeah, there's a mix there between demand and an attempt for supply. But if you go to the top four headlines, the shared equity, right? So that's obviously injecting more money into the market, so increases demand, so pushes prices up. With the 10 billion in social housing, that's great, right? But it's not going to happen quickly. We've got lack of builders, council approvals, and trade shortages. So that's something to think about. The 5% deposit scheme, again, great for people to get on the ladder, but more buyers, more competition, higher prices. And then in terms of the rent assistance, again, that's great for those people it's helping, but it's not supplying not solving the supply issues. So something to think about, Ben. You've given it a B. There we go. Let's move on to the coalition policies. I'll
start with my favourite policy on the books here, and this is the housing infrastructure program, where effectively the Liberals are going to be, and coalition, I should say, the Nats, are going to spend $5 billion in the ability to unlock 500,000 shovel-ready projects around the country. Now, that's the idea behind this is these projects are almost ready to go. They just need the final civil works, the services connected. And we mentioned Labor was throwing 500 million at that. They're throwing 500 billion. So if you're talking about macro impact, 500,000 lots for sale has a material impact on new supply. right? So this is the best new supply policy. And again, it comes back to what Tim Reardon was telling us in terms of working with industry to solve the problem. This is a good initiative if the coalition was to win.
The use it or lose it policy too, Ben. So it's a model. So those approved projects must commence within 12 months or the funds will be reallocated. So again, getting incentives aligned.
Correct.
Which we love. And also, to your point, is adding to supply. So housing infrastructure program, that's a good one. And then the next one is the first home buyer interest tax deduction, right? That's been interesting for that. That's something that exists over in the US, that you can get a tax deduction on your home. But for it to happen here, that's great. That's for someone who wants to get in, Ben. They obviously getting some cash flow relief that allows them to get into the market, and in some cases that's a significant amount of money for folks. There's a capped amount that you can get, which is up to the loan value of $650,000. So that's fair and equitable, irrespective of your earning and the price that you pay. There's about $1.25 billion that's wanting to be paid over 4 years. But again, Ben, is this a supply response, or is this a demand response? Well, clearly, for those who get in, it's great. They'd be stoked. But for the market in general, this is a demand side policy.
Yeah, it is. So the mechanism that they've thought about here is only on new builds. Right. If this policy was to be carte blanche across existing and new,
oh my God,
it would absolutely have a significant impact. So the supply thinking that's gone on here is this is for new builds only, and so that's where the supply side comes in. But the fact that you could potentially get $1,000 a month in support savings to service your mortgage. If you're a first-home buyer, this is money for jam.
Yeah,
right. If you were thinking about buying in the suburban areas of Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, or whatever, this is a ripper. This is again, it's throwing cash at you, right, for your vote. So that's what it does. But as I said, because it's new builds, that's probably the only thing that sort of gives it that's an interesting policy, and it's 5-year capped, so it's not indefinite. But to your point, the US have just reversed out of that, right, in terms of having tax deductibility in your own home. So the experiment didn't necessarily work there. So it's definitely a different way to approach incentivizing people into their new home, and it's a bit of a cash grab.
The next one is reducing immigration to ease the housing demand. So temporarily lower the net overseas migration to relieve the pressure on housing. So the coalition have stated that they think it will free up roughly 40,000 dwellings in the first year and over 100,000 in 5 years. So by scaling back sort of migration and international student flows, that in their mind, that'll reduce the competition for rentals and starter homes, giving the construction of new supply a chance to catch up. So I think at face value, Ben, that's actually not bad, because it does speak to the supply story. But we are of the view that by bringing people into our market, that creates growth and that creates more demand, and we'd rather grow the pie. So I think at headline level, we think that there's we can see where they're going here, but we're obviously of view that a bigger Australia is better for everyone.
Look, at the end of the day, we're interested in the economic activity and growing the economic pie, because that allows us to not have to borrow money to support the most need in our community. What it allows us to do is to use the money that's growing in the economy to support those most need in the community. And immigration is definitely one way in which we grow the economic pie. So I don't like the policy generally, but if it was targeted, so let's say to the point we're bringing in the tradies and we're bringing in the students, but we can't bring in family of loved ones and just general people who want to migrate here. So high skilled labour, tradies, and also students. Don't underestimate the power of that student market for us. It is worth a fortune to us, in terms of the amount that it grows our economy. So I feel like that's as a blanket policy, People are blaming immigration for the cost of living and all those types of things. So I just think it's narrow-minded in terms of, so if it was a more targeted policy and we had a little bit more detail around it, then I'd take a look at it. But the way in which I see it there, if it's just generally stopping that immigration, I don't think that's smart.
The next one proposed, Ben, is the ban on foreign home buyers, temporary, so increasing the availability for local buyers by making sure that the foreign investors and non-resident temporary visa holders cannot purchase existing homes in Australia for 2 years.
This is smart.
That's definitely smart. That's to the earlier point that if we can channel demand into the new market and ease demand on the existing market, that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It's a simple policy. It makes a lot of sense to me. So keep the high skilled labour, the tradies coming in and the students coming in, but don't allow them to buy the existing stock. Allow them to buy the new stock. And these people usually want to live in medium and high density. Now, this is the area that is struggling in terms of the construction costs, all of the delays and the lack of productivity that we get in our construction industry. This is a classic case of bring them in. They're bringing fresh cash in. It's money that we never had to produce one bit of productivity to actually get their money into the country. So it just makes perfect sense to me that they would still be able to buy new, but they just can't buy the existing stock.
Next one is the Superannuation Home Deposit Scheme. So being able to get access $50,000 from Super. Sure, makes sense. It gives people an opportunity, but they get on the ladder, but it's just going to create more demand.
Yeah, it's definitely going to create more demand. And just quickly on this one, the Liberals are also saying that the 5% deposit, where Labor have gone unconditional for everyone, they are still honouring the 40,000. So there's the 40,000 that will still get access to that. But in addition to that, you've got your super that you can access. Now, I'm positive on this policy. I actually think this is a sensible policy if the deposit is the biggest barrier of getting into the market, because it's not just drained out and then forgotten about. Over time, and if you sell the property, you'll have to replenish your superannuation back into that. So it's a getting you on the ladder story here, which is what we want to see. So I am a fan of this policy. At the end of the day, it is their money. It's their money, and the government's restricting you to have access to your money for something that is potentially going to be positive. Now, to Bryce's point, it is very much a demand driver, so that it does accelerate potential demand in the market. But I think overall, the balancing out the pros and cons, I'm pro for that policy.
Okay, next one, Ben.
And the next one is construction apprenticeships boosts. So one of the things we forgot to mention with Labor, free TAFE. Here is the problem I have with free TAFE, Bryce. When we talk about running efficiently and effectively, if I offered you free TAFE and I said to you, since we've offered free courses in TAFE, only 1 in 5 people are completing those courses, Bryce, do you think that's a good use of taxpayers' money?
No, it's not, and so we should align the incentives again. So the way that often happens where you pay up front and then when you complete, you get the money back.
Yeah, so none of that's happening. So it's just anyone can start a course. And so we'll have all these people starting, but no one finishing. And if we don't have those qualifications of those tradies, then we'll still continue to have that shortfall. So I don't like that policy. I think that, but what I don't mind about the construction apprentice boost is, again, it's all about saying there's a $12,000 incentive to employees to employ the apprentices. Now, when they're employed, they've got to go and do their trade portion, their schooling, as well as being on the tools.
Yeah.
Well, in most cases, I know we still get a drop-off there, but the drop-off is not 80%. It's nowhere near 80%. You might get a drop-off of 30% of those people who start their apprenticeships and not finish because they're getting actually cash as they're working. So this, to me, is a sensible policy. It's directing money in the right places as opposed to filling up classrooms for the first month and then basically those students not turning up. I just find that wasteful, and I think it's a bad policy.
The next one, Ben, is easing the mortgage lending rules. This will appease you to a certain extent, given that you've been quite vocal around that serviceability buffer, but helping firsties get access to lending through the current 3% buffer on top. Obviously, lowering that to say 2%, which would mean that they can increase the amount that they could borrow, and then help them get into more property, which is great. And I think it's a great idea. I also it's demand side, so it's obviously going to have inflationary impact on price. The other thing too, Ben, is arguably you're giving a lower serviceability to the people with the P plates, right? So imagine giving someone who's been driving for 30 years access to your Aston Martin, and going off you go, and you think, well, okay, on the body of work I've been driving for the last 20 years, you'd feel quite comfortable, versus you probably wouldn't give the keys to your Aston Martin to your 18-year-old son who's just got their P plates. I think it's a bit like that here, right? Some of these firsties, getting access to lower serviceability without having runs on the board about being able to manage a mortgage, but ultimately that's a side issue, and I think that helping them access an additional borrowing capacity is a good thing. I think good thing for the context of them getting into the market.
Yeah, it is definitely a good thing there. But I think if you combine that with some of the percentage of people who are going to have a 5% deposit and a lower borrow, they're going to go for. I mean, it's human nature, Bryce, that people will pay the price that they emotionally believe to get into the market, right?
Yeah.
So we are going to see potentially an increase in defaults because. Yes. Because these people may not have got into a rhythm of being better money managers and learning how to save and manage their money, right?
That's why our finance system's so robust, Ben. We've got recourse lending. We've got 10 and 20% deposits for the majority. Like we've got that's why our system's so robust. And essentially, this one's just weakening the system to a certain extent.
But this one should be across the board, in terms of, so it could be down to the 2% anyway, because yes, it will increase demand, but it'll also, here is the thing that a lot of people forget. When you're building medium and high density properties, you need a baseline of pre-sales, right? And so getting those pre-sales potentially gets you off the ground, and then you get to sell the remaining as you construct and potentially at completion. By having the buffer rates at 3%, where serviceability calculators are running at 8s and 9s, it's ridiculous, right? And because the argument from APRA is it's putting protections in terms of financial stability in our marketplace, but interest rates are coming down, right? So they're not going up. So there's got to be some movement there, and there has been movement in other nations, and we still continue to sit here. And so it's definitely going to increase demand, but there is some supply benefits. We've seen the worst level of approvals in the last decade, in the last 3 years, right? That we haven't seen the level of approvals in that, because everything's become too expensive. Wages have gone too high. Cost of materials have gone up through inflation. But, we need to then be able to move the affordability measure to be able to get in there. And that's unfortunately how the market works, by allowing people to borrow a little bit more.
Next one, Ben, is freeze on the National Construction Code. So over the last decade, there's been updates on energy efficiency, accessibility standards. So it's added compliance cost per dwelling. So the proposal is a 10-year freeze, meaning no additional requirements will be imposed beyond current standards. So that gives builders certainty in cost hikes that would price out some buyers. So this is clearly aimed at making it cheaper and speeding up approvals.
This is one of my more favourite policies, where it's all about stopping the red tape, stopping the over excess that's happening in terms of, because all of these things cost money, and it's making property prices more expensive to build. So it's a sensible move. It then allows prefab and potentially 3D printing homes to also have a run at being able to approve themselves to work in the Australian market. Now, we know from evidence out of the US that a prefab or a 3D printed home can be built multiple times quicker and up to 3 times cheaper and 10 times less labour cost. So if you want to talk about getting, shelter, right, in the basic sense, but if you want energy grading 6, 5s and 6, and you want all the bells and whistles attached to it, well, that's the trade-off. So the trade-off is, what do you want? Do you want people in comfortable homes, or do you want people in the most amazing energy efficient homes? I think you've got to be realistic about what your expectations are. And this is another clear demonstration that the Liberal Party and Coalition are talking to industry as opposed to talking to bureaucrats and welfare associations, which is that classic case of where you're seeing their policy decisions go compared to the Labor Party.
All right, bring it home, Ben, with the final one.
Yeah, so this one is also a policy that I'm in huge favour of. In terms of productivity for us to build homes, we also need a workforce that is willing to work. And what we saw through the Australian Building and Construction Commission, which was introduced, which eradicated the powers of the unions, meant that we had better construction sites, more productive, lower costs, and that obviously lower costs means the end product is cheaper to buy. That when the Labor Party came into power, obviously as a favour to their union backers, they removed this commission. And what did we see about the MFCFU? Have I got that correct?
Yeah.
The MFCU. Thank you. And we're seeing the corruption, the intimidation, the lack of productivity, all of those things build off the back of that. So re-establishing this commission makes a hell of a lot of sense to me in terms of that there won't be jobs for mates, there won't be government money that's wasted, in terms of, so it's another, excellent policy decision to stop the graft, corruption and fraud that's happening via those unions.
So a bit of a mix there, Ben. There's some demand side impacts. There's also probably, in our view, more supply side initiatives there. So if we go to the top four, the mortgage interest deduction, look, that's just going to encourage more buyers. It's going to increase prices. The super access, the same, increases your buying power, so therefore it'll drive prices up further. The council incentives, that sounds good, but they'll be up against NIMBYism, Ben. So you've got councils who will love to get some money from federal governments, but their constituents are their ratepayers, and they'll be saying, "Not in my."
Well, most of those are greenfield sites, so that is a good story. But because we are definitely seeing new rezonings happening, and yes, there's definitely a lot of fighting going on in councils around stopping refill or brownfill areas in terms of some of these constructions.
And of course, that migration cut will ease pressure slightly, but the net intake is still strong compared to long-term averages. So, Ben, what do we think that it would take to actually fix housing? We've tackled this in the past, but it's worth us revisiting a couple of things here. And clearly, as a headline, supply side rather than demand side. That's the baseline here. But let's talk to a couple of other ideas that we have that for people to keep in mind as they cast their vote this weekend on whether it will actually fix our housing crisis that we've got.
Yeah, so how we build supply is we need investment. We need private investment. So whether that's coming from people who are buying their home or coming from investors who are looking to get a return on allocating their capital. What we don't want is too much. I mean, what you've seen here is a $43 billion package from Labor and, sort of around a $30 billion package from the Liberals around that sort of thing. So it's trying to buy their way to fix the problem. Whereas in our sense, it's just get out of the way, let the free market operate, and then again, provide for the most need in our community. That would be the way in which I would look at it. Because if that private investment doesn't come, Bryce, we are talking about hundreds of billions of dollars that would need to be funded by industry, super, or governments to build that critical supply that we need in the marketplace. So the way in which I look at that is everyone might say, they take a very limited look at it and say, well, we've got a problem with housing affordability. But if everyone found out that if we don't let the market operate as a free market, it's going to hit us all ultimately with higher taxes at the state and federal level. Once it starts hitting their hip pockets as owner-occupiers, all of a sudden their views change, which is no different. This election at the moment is not about climate change as much as it is about housing affordability, because once everyone realises you pay higher electricity bills through the transition, right? Now everyone's sort of saying, well, climate's important. So if we only produce 1% of the carbon emissions or 3% of the carbon emissions globally, all of a sudden it's like we've got to get that balance right. So I think this is another example of where that's playing itself out. And so, supply, get rid of the red tape, reduce the amount of taxes and charges, and we'll be happy in terms of being able to build that through.
You got some feedback you want to give around bedrooms. I'll come to you in a sec, Ben, but just a couple of quick ones. Support regional growth by investing in high-speed rail, which makes Newcastle, Wollongong, Central Coast, Geelong all very accessible to the big hubs. We've talked about modernising construction, having access to prefab, use AI, robotics, just to make them faster and cheaper. Obviously, skilled labour, we touched on this around streamlining visas for foreign tradies to ease the current construction workforce shortage. And we talked about foreign investment, Ben. But talk to us a bit about an idea that you've talked privately with me a lot and also a couple of times on this pod around bedrooms in existing houses.
Yeah, so one of the context is this. The most tax effective and most tax rewarding asset that you can own is a principal place of residence. It's not taxed when you sell it. So they're exempt from capital gains tax. It has no measure in terms of your means testing if you've got a pension, and you can take around 600,000 as a couple and plough that into your super tax free. Like seriously, this is the big challenge we've got in the sense that basically the own home is the best investment you can ever make. Now, one of the problems, however, in impacting your capital gains is if you rent out a room, not someone who's boarding, there are some rules around boarding, but if you rent out a room, then ultimately you will impact the capital gains because you're getting an income off the value of your principal home. My view is this, whether it's a 3-year or a 5-year period, you get up to 3 or 5 years where you can rent out a room, okay? Yep. And the idea here is take the demand out of the equation, right? People need shelter, but they don't necessarily need to own or buy a home. So if you were to think about ways in which over a 3 or a 5-year period, you can house and build community, and build, there's a lot of people, single people living in homes that they can potentially partner up, but they don't do it because it ultimately impacts, their future capital event and their finances. So that would be a great way in being able to reduce the demand currently that we're seeing for not only rental, but also for future purchases. So I think that should be something that we should be thinking about when it comes to policies around reducing the level of demand for new housing. And that would, again, take pressure off rents and everything else associated with that.
Yeah, because we don't have a bedroom shortage. We have an exclusive use of a dwelling shortage, right? So if, to your point, if you get access, open up some of those bedrooms, that would relieve the pressure and it would immediately impact supply, which is what we've been talking about. So very good. Hey, I guess the conclusion, Ben, is irrespective of, a couple of things. Federal government's direct control, you said this earlier, is around housing supply is limited because most levers sit with the states and the councils. But I think the important point here is I think the major benefit of both side of politics policies is existing property owners. Economists believe that house prices will grow this year. We're on interest rates rising, where we're getting fuel poured onto the fire in terms of demand. So if you're an existing owner occupier, you're an existing investor, anyone who's currently on the ladder, Ben, whoever wins on the weekend, you are going to be the beneficiary. So therefore, you'd want to critically assess both parties' policies for their long-term implications, not necessarily their short-term implications, because we don't think that there's too much in it that's going to solve, and I use inverted commas, the affordability crisis, because some of them are impacting supply, but most of them are impacting demand.
Yeah, and for those of you who may be interested in, my coalition assessment, it's a B+. There's some things in there that I don't like, which I've just mentioned, but I've given it a B+ purely because the policies are more far-reaching. Okay, so the idea of the shovel-ready 500,000 lots, so they've got a better supply generation story than the Labor Party, and so that's why they get a B+, as opposed to Labor's policy, which obviously gets a B. I'll come back to you with what I'll give the Greens policy.
You don't even have to say. We know
when we get into what's making property news.
Well, I guess a couple of things too is we talked about this prior to us recording, Ben. A lot of the Labor stuff bakes in the policy, whereas a lot of the Liberal is one-off that allows us to go and trial and test. And if it doesn't work or we can't afford it, we can reverse it. So,
well, I think that's a good point. I mean, whenever I make an assessment of economic, because that's all I care about. I care about who runs the best economy. Right? When I make my vote, it's who's going to run the best economy. And what I don't like to see is costs baked in if it's not growing the pie. If it's growing the pie, I'll accept that. But what I do like about policies that have a set period, like example, the fuel excise, right? Let's say it's 25 cents. It's not baked in. So in other words, if the economy doesn't keep growing or it doesn't have an impact, we can stop it. Now, everyone says that media will go, oh, but they don't stop it. Well, they did. They gave an income tax incentive, a one-off, and then they rolled it for a couple of years because the economy needed it. But then they pulled it away. Like the Labor Party removed it. So they can remove these types of things. When you bake in tax cuts or when you bake in, spending, you're baking that in, and ultimately means that the pie has to keep growing. So economic management is really important. And the idea that you have views on baking it in or having sort of incentive programs, you've got to be thinking about that, because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is growing the economy. Because when you grow the economy, you've got more money for health, you've got more money for education, you've got more money for defence, you've got more money for those essential services that we expect and we get to enjoy as a great nation that we are.
Exactly. Thank you. Well, there you go, folks. There's our view. Hopefully good luck for you for the weekend as to who you cast your vote as Australia decides. Ben, my life hack today is an election week hack, or my life by design hack. And it's just look, to be honest, you could argue that it's an extension of my mindset minute today. But during this remaining time in the election week, spend 10 minutes checking the news and then 10x that amount of time working on your own financial game plan. So that's my hack today. Just get the ratio right. You can get caught up in headlines, doom scrolling X, debating policy with your mates. You and I are sitting here debating. We probably got biases as well that people will call out. But ultimately, get the ratio of focus right. Just get enough information to make an informed vote. And hopefully we've formed part of that today, for some. Then 10x the amount of time that you're moving your needle forward. So that's my life hack today, Ben. Get the ratio right. 10x the time you spend on this election to the amount of time you spend on your own plan. That is my suggestion. Hey, what's making property news today?
Well, mate, our good friend Tim Lawless, obviously head of research at CoreLogic. Obviously, it's election time, so we've got a bit of an election theme there. But Tim put out in the CoreLogic Pulse analysis of housing affordability for each of the electorates across Australia heading into the federal election. So the most unaffordable electorates to buy a home. See if I can say that.
That is a tough word on the run, isn't it?
It is. Okay, Bradfield in Sydney, obviously median house price 2.7 million. Then you've got McCullough in Sydney. Then you've got Banks in Sydney. Then you've got Flower in Sydney. Richmond, which is the rest of New South Wales, so that's Tweed Heads area, about 1.1 million to buy a home. Watson in Sydney. Then Chisholm makes the first appearance at number 7 for Melbourne, obviously in the southeast, the leafy east as we call it. Then you've got Greylander in inner western Sydney, and then you've got McPherson, which is the rest of Queensland, which is the Goldie, obviously. And then you've got Hindmarsh in Adelaide. It makes its first appearance. So they're the most, unaffordable.
And then I just did the count. 5 out of the 20 are outside of New South Wales.
There you go. Now you've got Solomon in Darwin as the most affordable. Then you've got Parks in the rest of New South Wales. You've got, is it Lingari in Northern Territory in the Outback? And then you've got Melbourne Inner. I think that's how Adam Bank gets his seat. Then you've got Kennedy in Cairns. Then you've got Durack in the rest of WA, which is Outback South. Then you've got Grey in South Australia, which is the Barossa or York, the mid-north. And these are house prices, medians around 380 Solomon at the top was around 500, then we're now down to 380. So that just gives you a bit of an idea, Bryce, in terms of, what's happening here. But I wanted to sort of bleed that into, my concern about the Greens Party, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to, and I've been saying this because obviously if you follow me, you understand I'm politically active. I do my lobbying as I need to for the association. I have obviously a self-interest, so that's fully disclosed in terms of representing the interests of property investors. What I struggle with the Greens policies are that it's all great to want dental, and it's all great to want free education. It's all great to want, but where is the economic policies that will actually drive the economic growth? Because all I hear from the Greens is more of big businesses, not paying taxes, and so we'll make them pay taxes. But there's no economic vision. There's no, drive for that. And the problem that I see when I look at affordable and unaffordable electorates is I see the Greens selling a misinformation story about promising three things: changes to negative gearing, changes to, fixing or capping rents in terms of those type of things. They are the dumbest ideas if you want to increase supply. They just make no sense at all in terms of, so ultimately the people that they're trying to save are the people who are going to be hurt the most. But the problem is, again, with the electorate, in some respects, is some people don't think deeply about that situation. And that's what I was saying before about if private investment doesn't come in, then it's expected that the government throws even more money at it. We're talking hundreds of billions. That's higher taxes. So make no mistake, when it comes to social democracy, as they call it, it doesn't work around the world. It just increases debt and it kills economic activity and economic growth. So beware of what you believe when it comes to these, really nice little slogans and catch cries. They are the most dangerous political party in regards to economic activity in this country. So I just want people to understand that. And if they say, they collaborate and keep honest. What I did love about Albo's interview recently with the AFR is, for the first time, I heard him talk about aspiration when he talked about negative gearing. So what I'm talking about there is, he said, no one can prove to me that it's not going to impact supply. So I'm not going to change negative gearing, but for that reason, but I'm also going to not change it because of aspiration. So people who work hard and think about wanting to provide financial security for their family, one way in which they do it is to start a private rental accommodation business. Now, you hear that Adam Vance and so forth talk about the 8th, 9th, 10th, 30th, 40th property, but that's rubbish. There's such a small percentage of people. It's clearly not true. Most people have 71%.
71% have one. Not most people have 71. That just blew your theory out of the water.
Most people have one property, 71%, and then two is 90% of the 2.3 million people who roughly own investment properties as individuals. So thank you for clarifying that, Bryce. Anyway, I'm stepping off my soapbox.
Oh, well, yeah. No, if you have any Greens listeners, they didn't make it this far anyway, Ben. So just the majority of our listeners will be one of the two major parties, I'm sure. But there you go, folks. We've obviously had a red-hot swing at headlines for both sides. We've tried to go under the doona, under the bonnet a little bit, and see what else they've got planned. So, but please keep in mind the message that Ben and I share on here, that you are in control of what you do, and whatever happens on Saturday, we're going to get broken promises. We're going to get people going, you said this in the lead up to the election and you didn't. And it's just the nature of the structure within which politics works. So please stop being surprised, because it's been the same for the last cycles for many, many, many times. So anyway, was it
Roosevelt who said you get the politicians you deserve, which basically means that your vote matters. So have a considered thought. Think slowly about what you're making decisions on, because whoever gets into power, you've got the politicians you deserve because you've voted them in.
Yeah.
And so that's a really important point.
Well said, mate. Until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
Only if you act on it, folks. See you next week.